To save her daughter, she spent a night with a millionaire. But what he did next left her. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The alarm clock screamed at 4:47 a.m., but Tasha Ellis was already awake. She had been staring at the ceiling for hours, her mind racing through numbers that refused to add up. Rent, $200. Groceries, $300. Daycare, $400. The stack of bills on her nightstand seemed to grow heavier each time she glanced at them, even in the darkness. From the small bed beside hers, 5-year-old Lyra stirred, her breathing shallow and uneven. Tasha's heart clenched as she watched her daughter's tiny chest rise and fall with more effort than any child should need. The purple shadows under Lyra's eyes had deepened over the past weeks, and her once bright smile appeared less frequently. "Mama?" Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, baby." Tasha reached over, smoothing her daughter's dark curls. "Just go back to sleep." But sleep was a luxury neither of them could afford anymore. Tasha slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the cold linoleum floor of their cramped studio apartment. The walls were thin enough that she could hear Mrs. Patterson's television next door, the morning news already droning about traffic and weather that felt irrelevant to her world. In the tiny kitchenette, she started the coffee maker, a wedding gift from her marriage that had lasted exactly 18 months. Some gifts outlived the giver's good intentions. She pulled on her scrubs for the morning shift at Riverside General, where she worked as a nursing assistant. In 6 hours, she'd change into her evening uniform for the diner downtown. 2 jobs, 16-hour days, 7 days a week. And still, it wasn't enough. The envelope from Dr. Harrison sat unopened on the counter, its medical letterhead feeling like a death sentence she couldn't bear to read. But she knew. Deep down, she already knew what it said. Her phone buzzed. A text from her supervisor at the hospital. "Can you cover Jenny's shift today, double pay?" Tasha closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. Double pay meant leaving Lyra with Mrs. Patterson longer than usual. It meant missing bedtime stories and the way her daughter's eyes lit up when she described her dreams of becoming a princess who could fly. But double pay also meant maybe, just maybe, getting closer to whatever impossible number was written in that envelope. She typed back, "Yes." The coffee finished brewing, filling their small space with the only luxury she allowed herself. As she poured the dark liquid into her travel mug, Lyra coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Tasha's hands shake. "Mama, my chest feels funny again." Tasha set down her mug and returned to her daughter's bedside. Lyra's small hand found hers, fingers intertwining with the trust that only children possessed. Complete faith that their parent could fix anything, solve everything, make the scary things disappear. "I know, sweetheart. Mama's going to take care of it, I promise." The words felt like glass in her throat. She kissed Lyra's forehead, tasting the salt of fever that had become too familiar. Her daughter's skin was warm but not burning, a small mercy in a world that seemed determined to offer none. "When I come home tonight, we'll watch that movie you love, the one with the singing princess." Lyra smiled, and for a moment, the shadows under her eyes seemed lighter. "The one where she finds her voice? That's the one." As Tasha gathered her things and prepared to leave for another impossible day, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. 27 years old, but her eyes looked ancient. Beautiful still, people told her that, but beautiful in the way of something weathered by storms. She thought about the envelope, about the numbers she couldn't face, about the conversation she'd eventually have to have with a doctor who would speak in careful, measured tones about options and time-sensitive procedures. The morning sun was just beginning to filter through their single window, casting long shadows across their small world. Somewhere in the city, people were waking up to problems that money could solve, to worries that seemed monumental but were temporary. Tasha Ellis was waking up to a fight for her daughter's life, and she had no idea that 12 miles away, in a penthouse office overlooking the harbor, Lewis William was staring out at the same sunrise, feeling emptier than he'd ever felt in his 33 years. She had no way of knowing that their worlds were about to collide in the most unexpected way. Look at your child, your sibling, or someone you love deeply. What would you do if their life depended on money you don't have? Would you be as strong as Tasha? The envelope had been staring at her for 3 days. Tasha sat in the hospital break room during her 15-minute lunch, the medical letterhead pristine white against the scratched table surface. Around her, Other nursing assistants chatted about weekend plans and complained about difficult patients, their voices fading into background noise. She'd carried the envelope in her purse, moved it from the kitchen counter to her nightstand, even held it while Lyra slept, but opening it felt like pulling the pin from a grenade. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Patterson. "Lyra's napping, but she asked for you twice. That cough is getting worse, honey." Tasha's hands trembled as she finally tore open the seal. "Pediatric cardiology consultation. Urgent." The words swam before her eyes. "Hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Surgical intervention required." The medical jargon meant nothing to her, but the number at the bottom of the page meant everything. $340,000. She read it again, certain she'd misunderstood. $340,000. The number was so impossibly large it felt fictional, like someone had accidentally added too many zeros. "Tasha, you okay?" Nina Rodriguez, another nursing assistant, slid into the chair across from her. Nina had been working at Riverside General for 15 years and had the weathered kindness of someone who'd seen everything. "My daughter," Tasha's voice cracked. "She needs heart surgery." Nina's expression immediately softened. "Oh, honey, how serious?" "Without it, she—" Tasha couldn't finish the sentence. The words were too heavy, too final. Nina reached across the table, covering Tasha's hand with her own. "What did the cardiologist say about payment plans? Most hospitals have programs. $340,000. The number fell between them like a stone. Nina went quiet. In the silence, Tasha could hear the familiar sounds of the hospital. Monitors beeping, gurneys rolling past, the distant hum of life-saving machines that cost more than most people made in a year. "There has to be something," Nina said finally. "Insurance, state programs, charitable foundations." Tasha had already made those calls. Her insurance covered 60%, leaving her with an impossible $136,000. The state programs had waiting lists stretching months. The charitable foundations required applications, board approvals, and time they didn't have. Dr. Harrison had been gentle but clear. Lyra needed surgery within 8 weeks, or her condition would become inoperable. 8 weeks to find money that might as well have been $8 million. "I need to get back," Tasha whispered, folding the letter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She helped elderly patients to the bathroom, changed bed sheets, took vitals, and smiled at families who probably had no idea how lucky they were to worry about normal things, like test results and recovery times, instead of impossible numbers. During her dinner break, she called 3 more foundations. The first had stopped accepting new applications. The second required a 6-month waiting period. The third put her on hold for 23 minutes before disconnecting. By the time her shift ended, desperation had settled into her bones like an ache. She picked up Lyra from Mrs. Patterson's apartment, grateful for the elderly woman's kindness, but hating the way her daughter looked so small and fragile in the oversized armchair. "Mama, Mrs. Patterson made me soup, but I couldn't finish it," Lyra said, her voice thin. "My tummy feels funny." Tasha knelt beside the chair, brushing her daughter's hair back from her fevered forehead. "That's okay, baby. We'll get you something else at home." "Are you sad, Mama?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Children saw everything, felt everything. Tasha had tried so hard to hide her fear, but 5-year-olds possessed an intuition that could cut right through pretense. "Just tired, sweetheart. Mama's always tired after work. When I grow up, I'm going to take care of you," Lyra said, with the solemn determination that only children possessed. "I'll work really hard and buy you a big house with a garden." Tasha's throat tightened. "You just worry about being a little girl, okay? Let Mama handle the grown-up stuff." That night, after Lyra fell asleep, Tasha sat at their tiny kitchen table with her laptop, scrolling through fundraising websites. She created an account, uploaded a photo of Lyra smiling in her favorite princess dress, and started typing. "My name is Tasha Ellis, and I'm asking for help saving my daughter's life." She wrote about Lyra's condition, about the surgery, about being a single mother working 2 jobs. She wrote until her fingers cramped and her eyes burned. When she finished, she read it 3 times before hitting publish. The fundraising goal felt like a mountain, $136,000. After 2 hours online, she'd raised $43. Tasha closed the laptop and put her head in her hands. Somewhere in the city, people were going to bed without counting every dollar, without calculating how many double shifts equaled a child's heartbeat. She thought about calling her mother in Atlanta, but pride stopped her. Her mother had warned her about moving to the city, about getting involved with Lyra's father, about trying to do everything alone. Outside their window, the city hummed with life. Restaurants closing, bars opening, people living normal lives with normal problems. And in a penthouse 12 miles away, Lewis William was staring at his untouched dinner, wondering why everything he'd ever wanted felt like nothing at all. Neither of them knew that tomorrow would change everything. Lewis William had been staring at the same contract for 2 hours, and the words might as well have been written in a foreign language. His corner office on the 32nd floor of William Medical Center overlooked the harbor, where morning fog was just beginning to lift. The view was supposed to be inspiring. His mother had specifically chosen this office for him when he'd reluctantly joined the family business 5 years ago. Everything about his life was supposed to be inspiring, and yet he felt nothing. "Mr. William?" His assistant, Camden, appeared in the doorway with another stack of documents. "The board meeting is in 20 minutes, and your mother wanted to review the quarterly projections before—" "Cancel it," Lewis said without looking up. Camden blinked. "Sir? The meeting. Cancel it. Tell them I'm sick. But your mother specifically requested—" "Camden." Lewis finally raised his eyes, and something in his expression made the younger man step back. "Please just cancel it." After Camden left, Lewis loosened his tie and walked to the window. 33 years old, heir to a medical empire worth $500 million, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt genuinely happy. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was surrounded by people dedicated to healing, and he felt more broken every day. His phone buzzed with texts from his mother. Margaret William didn't accept sick as an excuse for anything, least of all missing important meetings. But the thought of sitting in that boardroom, listening to people discuss profit margins while real people downstairs fought for their lives, made him feel sick in a way that had nothing to do with his physical health. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator. The cafeteria on the 4th floor was a place Lewis rarely visited. Board members and executives ate in the private dining room on the top floor, insulated from the reality of hospital life. But today, he needed to be around people who cared about something real. The space was crowded with doctors, nurses, and staff, grabbing quick meals between shifts. Lewis bought a coffee and found an empty table near the window, grateful to be anonymous in his casual clothes. That's when he saw her. She was sitting alone at a corner table, staring at papers spread in front of her with an expression of complete devastation. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she kept running her hands through her hair, as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle through sheer determination. Even exhausted and overwhelmed, she was striking. Not in the polished, artificial way of the women his mother constantly tried to set him up with, but in a way that was raw and real and utterly magnetic. She picked up what looked like a medical bill, and Lewis watched her shoulders shake as she read it. Then she put her head in her hands, and he could see her trying not to cry in public. Something inside his chest cracked. Lewis found himself standing before he'd consciously decided to move. He walked over to her table, his heart beating faster than it had in years. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but are you okay?" She looked up, and her eyes, dark brown and swimming with unshed tears, hit him like a physical force. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I'm fine," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "Just having a rough day." Lewis glanced at the papers on her table. He could see enough to know they were medical bills, and the numbers visible made his stomach turn. Not because they were large, he'd written checks for more than that without thinking, but because of what they clearly meant to her. "I don't mean to pry," he said, "but I work here. If there's something I can help with—" She let out a bitter laugh. "Unless you can magically make $300,000 appear, I don't think anyone can help." The number hung between them. Lewis's mind raced, calculating what that amount meant to him versus what it clearly meant to her. It was less than he'd spent on his last car, less than his monthly allowance from the family trust. "Can I sit?" he asked. She looked at him suspiciously, as if trying to figure out his angle. "Why?" "Because you look like someone who could use a friend right now, and honestly, I could too." Something in his voice must have convinced her, because she gestured to the empty chair across from her. "I'm Lewis," he said, sitting down. "Tasha." She started gathering the papers, clearly embarrassed. "And this isn't— I don't usually fall apart in public." "Your daughter?" Lewis asked gently, having caught sight of a pediatric cardiology letterhead. Tasha's composure cracked completely. "She's 5. She needs heart surgery, and I can't. I work 2 jobs. I've applied for every program, started a fundraiser online, and I've raised $43 in 2 days." Her voice broke. $43. Lewis felt something shift inside him, like a lock clicking open after years of being sealed shut. This woman wasn't asking him for anything. She wasn't trying to impress him or use him. She was just a mother terrified of losing her child, and her pain was so real it made his chest ache. "What's her name?" he asked. "Lyra." Tasha's expression softened despite her tears. "She wants to be a princess who can fly. She tells everyone she meets about her dreams, even when she can barely breathe." Lewis thought about his own privileged childhood, how every dream had been handed to him before he'd even thought to want it. This little girl was fighting for her life while dreaming of flying. "Tasha," he said carefully, "what if I told you the money didn't have to be a problem?" She stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if someone wanted to help? No strings attached, no repayment necessary. Just help." "You're talking about charity." Her voice turned cold. "I don't need pity." "It's not pity," Lewis said quickly. It's seeing someone who deserves better than the hand they've been dealt." Tasha studied his face, searching for something. "Who are you really?" And that's when Lewis realized he was about to change both their lives forever. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross first. Tasha watched Lewis's face, searching for answers to questions she wasn't sure she wanted to ask. There was something in his eyes, a depth that didn't match his casual clothes or his presence in the hospital cafeteria. Something that made her pulse quicken with a mixture of hope and fear. "You didn't answer my question," she said quietly. "Who are you really?" Lewis ran a hand through his dark hair, and for a moment he looked younger than his years. "That's complicated. Try me." He glanced around the busy cafeteria, as if seeing it for the first time. Nurses grabbing quick sandwiches between rounds, doctors scrolling through charts while they ate, families camped out with vending machine coffee and worried expressions. Real people dealing with real problems. "My name is Lewis Willian," he said finally, "and my family. We own this hospital. Actually, we own 12 hospitals across the state." Tasha felt the blood drain from her face. She looked down at the medical bills spread across the table, bills from Willian Medical Center, and then back at his face. "You're the heir to all of this, yes?" Lewis's voice carried no pride, only a weary resignation. "And before you ask, no, I didn't seek you out. I came down here because I needed to escape a board meeting, and I saw you sitting here, and you looked like I felt lost." Tasha gathered her papers with shaking hands. "I need to go." "Wait." Lewis reached across the table, not quite touching her, but close enough that she stopped moving. "Please, just let me explain." "Explain what? That you're slumming it with the poor people? That this is some kind of game to you?" Her voice was sharp with hurt and humiliation. "No." The word came out fierce, almost angry. "It's the opposite of that. Do you know how long it's been since someone looked at me and saw just a person, not a bank account or a business opportunity or a potential husband for someone's daughter?" Tasha paused, her hand still clutching the medical bills. There was something raw in his voice that made her look at him again. Really look. His expensive watch, his perfect haircut, the way he carried himself, all the markers of wealth she should have noticed. But underneath all of that, she saw something else. Loneliness that mirrored her own. "When you looked at me just now," Lewis continued, "you saw someone you thought might help, not because of who I am or what I have, but because I'm human, and you needed another human to care. That's not something that happens to me very often." "So this is about you feeling better about yourself?" Tasha asked, but the edge in her voice had softened slightly. "Maybe it started that way," Lewis admitted. "But the moment you told me about Lyra, it became about her. About a little girl who wants to fly and a mother who would do anything to save her." Tasha closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on her. The sleepless nights, the impossible choices, the growing fear that she was going to lose the only thing that mattered in her world. "Why should I trust you?" she whispered. "Because," Lewis said gently, "you don't have any other choice. And because I'm not asking for anything in return. People like you always want something in return." "People like me," Lewis repeated, and there was something bitter in his voice. "Do you know what people like me usually want? Trophy wives who look good at charity galas, business partnerships that increase market share, social connections that open doors to more money and more power." He leaned forward. "What I want is to help a little girl I've never met, because her mother loved her enough to work herself to exhaustion trying to save her." Tasha felt tears threatening again. "The surgery costs $340,000. Yes, I know, and that's not an impossible number for me." Lewis's voice was careful, gentle. What's impossible is the idea of sitting in boardrooms talking about profit margins while children die because their families can't afford to save them. I can't accept charity, Tasha said automatically, but even as she said it, she thought about Lyra's labored breathing that morning, about the way her daughter had fallen asleep sitting up because lying down made it harder to breathe. It's not charity, Lewis said. Call it an investment, in something that actually matters. Tasha stared at him, this man who could solve her biggest problem with what amounted to pocket change for him. What do you want from me? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Honestly, Lewis met her eyes, I want to take you to dinner, somewhere quiet where we can talk, where I can tell you about growing up in a world where everything has a price except the things that actually matter, and where you can tell me about Lyra and what it's like to love someone so much that you'd sacrifice everything for them. That's it? Dinner? That's it. Tasha thought about Lyra, about the envelope from Dr. Harrison, about the impossible timeline and the even more impossible sum of money. She thought about $43 raised in 2 days, and the growing certainty that she was going to fail the only person who had ever truly needed her. If I say yes, she said slowly, what happens to Lyra's surgery? Lyra's surgery happens, Lewis said without hesitation, regardless of whether you have dinner with me or not. She gets the best cardiac team in the country, the best care we can provide, and she gets to grow up and become that flying princess she dreams about. Tasha felt something break open in her chest, not breaking apart, but breaking open like a flower blooming. Hope, terrifying and beautiful and too fragile to trust. And that's when she realized she was about to make a decision that would change everything. 3 days later, Tasha stood in front of her tiny bathroom mirror, staring at a reflection she barely recognized. She'd borrowed a black dress from Nina, one of the only dresses in her size that didn't scream, single mother working 2 jobs. It was simple, elegant even, but wearing it felt like putting on a costume for a play she'd never auditioned for. Lewis had kept his word about Lyra's surgery. The very next morning, Dr. Harrison had called with news that still felt surreal. Lyra had been moved to the top of the surgical schedule. Her entire procedure would be covered by an anonymous benefactor, and the best pediatric cardiac team on the East Coast was being flown in specifically for her case. Lyra was scheduled for surgery in 5 days. 5 days. After weeks of impossible deadlines and crushing fear, her daughter would be safe in 5 days. "Mama, you look like a real princess," Lyra said from the doorway, her small voice filled with wonder. Tasha turned to find her daughter watching her with bright eyes. Despite everything, despite the medications and the restricted activity and the constant worry, Lyra still looked at the world with the magical thinking that only 5-year-olds possessed. "Just going to dinner, baby girl. Mrs. Patterson is going to make you her famous grilled cheese." "With the man who's helping me get better?" Tasha's throat tightened. She tried to explain Lewis's presence in their lives without making promises she couldn't keep. Children needed hope, but they also needed protection from adult complications. "Yes, with him. Is he nice?" The question was so simple, so direct, and yet Tasha found herself pausing. Was Lewis nice? She'd thought about him constantly over the past 3 days. His eyes when he'd looked at her in the cafeteria, the way he'd spoken about loneliness, the immediate way he'd acted to help Lyra without asking for anything in return. "I think so, sweetheart. I think he might be very nice." "Good," Lyra said with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. "Nice people should have dinner together." An hour later, Tasha stood outside Meridian, a restaurant she'd walked past 100 times but never imagined entering. The prices on the menu posted outside were more than she spent on groceries in a month. Valet parking, hostesses in designer clothes, a world that might as well have existed on another planet. She was 5 minutes early, but Lewis was already waiting. He looked different outside the hospital, more polished, more like what she would have expected from a billionaire's son. Dark suit that probably cost more than her rent, hair perfectly styled, an expensive watch catching the light. But when he saw her approaching, his expression softened into something genuine and nervous. "You came," he said, and there was relief in his voice. "I said I would. I know, but—" Lewis paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I wasn't sure you wouldn't change your mind." They were seated at a corner table overlooking the harbor, far enough from other diners to speak privately. The restaurant was exactly what Tasha had expected. Crystal glasses, waiters who moved like dancers, food that was more art than sustenance. But Lewis seemed as uncomfortable with the luxury as she felt. "I'm sorry," he said after they'd ordered. "This place, it's where I usually bring business associates. I should have chosen somewhere more." "More what?" "Real." He looked at her across the candlelit table. "Somewhere that felt less like a performance." Tasha sipped her wine, something that probably cost more per glass than she usually spent on an entire bottle, and studied his face. "Is that what this feels like to you? A performance?" "Most of my life feels like a performance," Lewis admitted. "Board meetings where I pretend to care about market projections, charity galas where I write checks to causes I know nothing about, dates with women my mother approves of, who see me as a means to an end. And this," Lewis met her eyes, "this feels like the first real conversation I've had in years." They talked about everything and nothing. Lewis told her about growing up in boarding schools, about a childhood where every friend was carefully vetted and every experience was curated. Tasha told him about her own childhood in Atlanta, about dreams of college that ended when she got pregnant at 21, about learning to be strong because no one else was going to be strong for her. "Do you regret it?" Lewis asked gently. "Having Lyra so young?" "Never," Tasha said without hesitation. "She saved me in ways I didn't even know I needed saving, but I do wonder sometimes what it would have been like to finish school, to have a career instead of just jobs. What did you want to study?" "Social work." Tasha smiled at the memory. "I wanted to help families navigate the system, advocate for people who didn't know how to advocate for themselves." "You still could," Lewis said, "after Lyra's surgery, when things settled down. With what money? What time?" Tasha laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. "That's a luxury I can't afford." "What if you could afford it?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibility. "Lewis," Tasha said carefully, "I need you to understand something. I'm grateful for what you're doing for Lyra, more grateful than I can ever express. But I can't be your charity project. I can't be the poor girl you rescue to make yourself feel better." "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" Lewis was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the harbor where lights reflected on dark water. "I've been empty for so long, I forgot what it felt like to want something real. And then I saw you in that cafeteria, fighting for your daughter with everything you had, and I remembered." "Remembered what?" "What it feels like to care about something that matters." Tasha felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. This man, this impossible, complicated man, was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. "I should go," she said softly. "Lyra will be wondering where I am." "Of course." Lewis signaled for the check, then turned back to her. "Tasha?" "Yes?" "Thank you for giving me a chance to be someone better than who I was this morning." As they waited for her taxi outside the restaurant, Lewis touched her arm gently. "The surgery is in 5 days," he said. "After that, when Lyra is recovering and safe, would you consider seeing me again? Not because of what I can do for you, but because of what you do for me." And as Tasha looked into his eyes, she realized she was already falling for a man whose world was nothing like hers. The waiting room at William Medical Center felt like a purgatory designed by architects who'd never waited for anything important in their lives. Tasha sat in the same uncomfortable chair she'd occupied for the past 4 hours, watching the clock on the wall tick past 2:47 p.m. Lyra had been in surgery since 10:30 a.m., and each minute felt like an eternity wrapped in another eternity. Mrs. Patterson sat beside her, knitting something small and pink with the determined focus of someone who needed to keep her hands busy. Nina had stopped by during her lunch break, bringing coffee that had long since gone cold, and reassurances that felt hollow but necessary. "Pediatric cardiac surgery takes time," Nina had said. "Complex cases can run 6-7 hours. The fact that they haven't come out yet doesn't mean anything's wrong." But Tasha's imagination didn't operate on medical logic. It operated on the primal fear of a mother who had handed her child over to strangers and could do nothing but wait. She'd barely slept the night before. Lyra had been so brave during the pre-op appointments, asking serious questions about whether she'd still be able to become a flying princess after the surgery. The anesthesiologist had been charmed by her earnestness, assuring her that her heart would be even stronger for flying once they were finished. "Will it hurt?" Lyra had asked Dr. Harrison. "A little bit, sweetheart, but we'll give you medicine to help with that, and when you wake up you're going to feel so much better. And Mama will be there. Mama will be right there when you wake up," Tasha had promised, her voice steady despite the terror crawling up her throat. Now, sitting in this sterile waiting room, that promise felt like the most important words she'd ever spoken. "Ms. Ellis," Tasha looked up to find a young nurse with kind eyes and scrubs decorated with cartoon hearts. "Yes? Doctor, Harrison asked me to update you. The surgery is progressing well. They're working on the final reconstruction now, and everything is looking very positive." Relief flooded through Tasha so powerfully that she had to grip the arms of her chair to keep from falling. How much longer? Probably another hour, maybe two, but the hardest part is behind us. After the nurse left, Tasha allowed herself to cry for the first time all day. "Mrs." Patterson patted her hand and murmured soothing words in Spanish, and for a moment, Tasha felt held by the kindness of people who had chosen to love her and Lyra without obligation. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Lewis, how is she? How are you?" Tasha stared at the message, surprised by how much she wanted to respond. Over the past 5 days, Lewis had sent flowers to Lyra, bright sunflowers that made her daughter laugh, and had checked in regularly without being intrusive. He'd kept his distance, respecting the fact that this was about Lyra's health, not their complicated relationship. But somehow, knowing he was thinking about them made the waiting feel less lonely. "Tasha, surgery going well. Another hour or two. Thank you for asking. Lewis, I've been thinking about you both all day. About that conversation she wanted to have with her surgeons about flying." Despite everything, Tasha smiled. Lyra had indeed cornered Dr. Harrison during their consultation, explaining in serious detail how important it was that her new heart be strong enough for princess duties that might involve flying. Tasha, she made them promise her new heart would be extra strong for adventures. Lewis, smart girl, gets that from her mother. Tasha, gets her stubborn streak from her mother too. Lewis, that's not stubbornness, that's strength. There's a difference. Tasha felt something warm unfurl in her chest. In the middle of the most terrifying day of her life, this man she barely knew was finding ways to remind her that she wasn't alone. At 4:23 p.m., Dr. Harrison emerged from the surgical wing, still in his scrubs, but with a smile that told Tasha everything she needed to know before he said a word. "The surgery was a complete success," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Lyra did beautifully. Her new heart function is exactly what we hoped for, and she tolerated the procedure better than many adults do." Tasha felt the world tilt back into focus. She's okay. She's more than okay. She's going to have a completely normal childhood. She'll be able to run and play and, yes, become that flying princess she's been talking about. Mrs. Patterson burst into tears. Nina, who had returned just in time to hear the news, wrapped Tasha in a hug that smelled like hospital soap and unconditional love. "When can I see her?" Tasha asked. "She's in recovery now. Give us about 30 minutes to get her settled in the PICU, and then you can sit with her while she wakes up." 30 minutes. After 5 days of terror and weeks of impossible choices, she only had to wait 30 more minutes to hold her daughter's hand and tell her everything was going to be all right. Her phone buzzed again. "Lewis, any news?" "Tasha, she's perfect. Surgery was a complete success." "Lewis, I'm so happy I could cry. How do you feel?" Tasha paused, trying to find words for the overwhelming mix of relief, gratitude, and exhaustion flowing through her. "Tasha, like I can breathe again for the first time in weeks." "Lewis, she's going to recover beautifully, and you're going to be able to watch her grow up and become everything she dreams of being." "Tasha, because of you." "Lewis, because of you. You never gave up fighting for her." When the nurse finally came to take her to Lyra's room, Tasha felt like she was walking toward a new life. Her daughter was going to be okay. More than okay. She was going to thrive. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she found herself thinking about a man who had made this miracle possible, who had asked for nothing in return except the chance to be part of something real. Maybe, just maybe, some miracles came with unexpected complications. 2 weeks after the surgery, Lyra was healing faster than anyone had dared to hope. The incision on her tiny chest was already beginning to fade into a thin pink line that she called her warrior mark. Her color had returned to a healthy golden brown, and for the first time in months, she could run from one end of their small apartment to the other without stopping to catch her breath. "Mama, watch me!" Lyra called out, spinning in circles with her arms outstretched. "I'm practicing my flying." Tasha watched from the kitchen where she was preparing lunch with ingredients that had mysteriously appeared in their refrigerator. Fresh vegetables, organic milk, the kind of food she'd always wanted to buy but couldn't justify spending money on. Nina swore she hadn't brought them, and Mrs. Patterson claimed innocence with a suspicious twinkle in her eye. The truth was, Small kindnesses had been appearing in their lives like unexpected flowers. The electric bill had been paid by an anonymous benefactor. Lyra's follow-up appointments were scheduled with specialists who usually had waiting lists months long. Even their building's perpetually broken elevator had been mysteriously repaired. Tasha knew who was behind it all, but Lewis had kept his distance since the surgery, giving her space to focus on Lyra's recovery. She found herself missing him more than she wanted to admit. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "I'll get it," Lyra announced, running to the window to peek outside. "Mama, there's a man with a pretty box." Tasha opened the door to find a delivery man holding an elegant package wrapped in silver paper with a note attached. Her name was written on the envelope in handwriting she was beginning to recognize. "For Lyra," she read aloud after the delivery man left. "Because every flying princess needs the right shoes for her adventures." Lyra bounced on her toes with excitement as Tasha carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a pair of the most beautiful shoes she'd ever seen. Tiny ballet flats in soft pink leather, with delicate flowers embroidered around the edges in silk thread. They looked handmade, precious, like something a real princess might wear. But it was the note tucked inside that made Tasha's breath catch. "Dear Lyra, I heard from a little bird that you're feeling much better and practicing your flying. These shoes are magic. They'll help you dance on air and run as fast as the wind. I hope they fit your brave heart as perfectly as they'll fit your feet, from someone who believes in flying princesses." "Are they really magic?" Lyra whispered, holding the shoes like they were made of spun gold. "I think they might be," Tasha said softly. As Lyra tried on her new shoes, which fit perfectly somehow, Tasha found her phone and typed a message. "Tasha, she's wearing them and insists they're helping her fly higher when she jumps off the couch." The response came quickly. "Lewis, tell her the magic only works if she listens to her mama about not jumping off furniture." "Tasha, how did you know her exact size?" Lewis, "I may have asked Mrs. Patterson to trace her foot while you were at the grocery store last week." Tasha laughed despite herself. The thought of Lewis conspiring with their elderly neighbor to secretly measure Lyra's feet was both absurd and deeply touching. "Tasha, she wants to know if you'd like to come see how fast she can run now." The pause before his response was longer this time. "Lewis, are you sure? I don't want to intrude on your recovery time." "Tasha, we're having grilled cheese and tomato soup for lunch. Nothing fancy. But if you'd like to meet the flying princess in person." "Lewis, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Tasha felt her stomach flutter with nervous energy. Having Lewis in their small apartment would make everything real in a way that text messages and distant kindnesses couldn't. She looked around their tiny space, the second-hand furniture, the dishes that didn't match, the careful organization that came from having very little to organize. Then she looked at Lyra, spinning in her new shoes with pure joy lighting up her face, and decided that joy was more important than perfectly matched dishes. 20 minutes later, Lewis knocked softly on their door. He looked different than he had at the restaurant. Casual jeans, a simple sweater, an armful of sunflowers that matched the ones he'd sent to the hospital. But it was his expression that made Tasha's heart skip. Nervous, hopeful, vulnerable in a way that expensive clothes could never quite hide. "Are you the magic shoe man?" Lyra asked before Tasha could make proper introductions. "I might be," Lewis said seriously, crouching down to her level. "Are you the flying princess I've heard so much about?" "Yes. Want to see how high I can jump now?" For the next hour, Tasha watched Lewis sit on their worn couch, listening with complete attention as Lyra explained her post-surgery exercise routine, her plans for princess training, and her theory about why vegetables probably helped with flying, even though they didn't taste as good as ice cream. He asked thoughtful questions. He admired her artwork taped to the refrigerator. He complimented the grilled cheese like it was a gourmet meal, and when Lyra insisted on showing him her warrior mark, he told her it was the most beautiful scar he'd ever seen because it proved how brave she was. "Mr. Lewis," Lyra said as she climbed onto the couch beside him, "are you Mama's friend?" "I hope so," Lewis said, glancing at Tasha. "I'd very much like to be." "Good friends take care of each other," Lyra announced with 5-year-old authority. "Mama takes care of me, and I'm going to take care of her when I grow up. Do you want to help take care of Mama too?" The question hung in the air, innocent and loaded with meaning that made both adults fall silent. "Yes," Lewis said quietly, his eyes finding Tasha's across the room. "I think I'd like that very much." As the afternoon stretched into evening, Tasha found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. Lewis helped Lyra build an elaborate fort out of couch cushions and blankets. He listened patiently to 3 different stories about flying princesses. He even helped with the dishes, which made Lyra giggle because rich people don't do dishes. "How do you know I'm rich?" Lewis asked with mock seriousness. "Mama told me, but you're the good kind of rich because you helped fix my heart." When Lyra finally fell asleep in her fort, curled up like a small animal in a nest of blankets, Lewis and Tasha found themselves sitting together on the floor, talking in whispers. "She's incredible," Lewis said softly. "I can see why you'd do anything for her." "She's my whole world," Tasha admitted. "I never knew I could love someone so much it physically hurt. And now I get to watch her grow up because of you." Lewis shook his head. "Because of you. You never stopped fighting for her." And as they sat in the quiet apartment, surrounded by the simple happiness of a child's laughter and the warmth of an unexpected connection, both of them began to realize they were falling in love. Margaret Willian had built an empire by reading people the way others read balance sheets. Standing in her corner office, overlooking the city that had made her family fortune, she watched her son through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Lewis was in the courtyard below, walking with a lightness in his step she hadn't seen in years. He was smiling at his phone, actually smiling, and there was something in his posture that spoke of a man who had found something worth caring about. Margaret had spent 33 years watching her only child drift through life like a ghost in an expensive suit. Boarding schools, Ivy League education, carefully orchestrated social connections, strategic business relationships, everything designed to prepare him for the legacy she'd built. But somewhere along the way, Lewis had become hollow, going through the motions of a life he'd never chosen, until 3 weeks ago, her assistant, Camden, knocked and entered with the file she'd requested. "The information you asked for, Mrs. Willian." Margaret took the folder without taking her eyes off her son. "Tell me, Tasha Ellis, 27 years old, single mother, works as a nursing assistant at Riverside General, no criminal record, no debt, except medical bills for her daughter's recent surgery. The daughter is Lyra Ellis, 5 years old, father not listed on the birth certificate. Financial status? Minimal savings, lives paycheck to paycheck. But she's never missed a payment on anything. Has excellent credit considering her income level. Her co-workers describe her as hard-working, reliable, devoted to her daughter." Margaret finally turned from the window. "And the surgery? Paid for by an anonymous benefactor. One guess who?" Margaret had suspected as much. The timing was too convenient, and Lewis had been distracted during board meetings for weeks. But it was the nature of his distraction that intrigued her. Not the distraction of a man having an affair, but the distraction of a man who had found purpose. "Schedule a lunch," she said. "Somewhere quiet. Just her and me." Camden blinked. "Ma'am, if this woman is going to be part of my son's life, I want to meet her before Lewis realizes what's happening to him." 2 days later, Tasha sat in the elegant dining room of the Metropolitan Club, feeling like she'd been summoned before a queen. The invitation had been polite, but unmistakably a command. Mrs. Margaret Willian would be honored by Ms. Ellis's company for lunch to discuss matters of mutual interest. The return address had been enough to make Tasha's hands shake. She'd borrowed another dress from Nina, spent an hour researching proper etiquette for dining with billionaires, and arrived 15 minutes early, only to sit in her car, working up the courage to go inside. Margaret Willian was exactly what Tasha had expected, and nothing like she'd imagined. Elegant in the way that only came from generations of wealth, but with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a handshake that could have closed business deals. "Miss Ellis, thank you for coming. Mrs. Willian, thank you for inviting me." They were seated at a corner table with a view of the harbor. The same harbor Tasha had looked at from the restaurant with Lewis, but from this height, it looked like a painting rather than a place where real people lived and worked. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked to meet with you," Margaret said, after they'd ordered. "I have some ideas." "I'm sure you do." Margaret studied Tasha's face with the intensity of someone evaluating a business proposal. "My son has been different lately, happier, more present. I haven't seen him like this since he was a child." Tasha waited, sensing that this conversation was going to require more listening than talking. "Lewis has always been a dutiful son," Margaret continued. "He's followed the path I laid out for him, made the choices I guided him toward. But he's never been passionate about anything, until now. Mrs. Willian, if you're concerned about my intentions, I'm not." The statement was firm, surprising. "I've had you investigated, Ms. Ellis. Thoroughly. You're not after his money. You barely cashed the check for your daughter's surgery follow-up care. You're not seeking social advancement. You haven't told anyone about your connection to our family. You're not using him for any purpose I can identify except the most dangerous one of all, which is, you genuinely care about him. Tasha felt heat rise in her cheeks. Yes, I do. Why? The question was so direct, so searching, that Tasha found herself pausing to really consider the answer. Because he sees me, not my circumstances or my struggles or what I can't give him. He sees who I am underneath all of that, and he treats that person like she matters. Margaret nodded slowly. And what do you see when you look at him? Someone who's been lonely for so long he forgot what it felt like to connect with another person. Someone who has everything except the things that actually make life worth living, such as purpose, joy, the feeling that you matter to someone just because you exist, not because of what you can provide. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, sipping her wine with the careful consideration of someone who never made decisions lightly. I built this empire for Lewis, she said finally. Everything I've done, every choice I've made, has been about securing his future. But somewhere along the way I think I forgot to secure his happiness. He's a good man, Tasha said softly. He's kind and thoughtful, and he makes my daughter laugh. But I think he's also lost, and I don't know if I'm the right person to help him find his way. Why not? Because our worlds are so different, because I don't know anything about charity galas or board meetings or the kind of life he was born into, because I'm a single mother who works 2 jobs and lives in a studio apartment. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes sharp with something that might have been approval. Do you know what I was before I married Lewis's father? Tasha shook her head. A nurse. I worked double shifts to put myself through nursing school, lived in a studio apartment not much different from yours. I married into this world, I wasn't born into it. Margaret's voice carried a warmth Tasha hadn't expected. Money doesn't make you worthy of love, Ms. Ellis. It just makes other people think it does. What are you saying? I'm saying that my son has been sleepwalking through his life for 33 years, and you woke him up. I'm saying that I've watched him smile more in the past month than in the past 5 years combined, and I'm saying that if you make him happy, truly happy, then you have my support. Tasha felt tears threatening. And if I hurt him? Margaret's smile was sharp but not unkind. Then you'll discover just how protective a mother can be, regardless of her son's age. As they finished lunch, Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box. For Lyra, I heard she likes things that sparkle. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with tiny star charms that caught the light like captured moonbeams. It's beautiful, Tasha whispered. It belonged to Lewis when he was small. He used to say the stars would protect him from bad dreams. Margaret's expression softened. I think it might work just as well for a little girl who's learning to fly. And as Tasha left the Metropolitan Club, she realized that the most unexpected ally in her growing love for Lewis might just be the woman she'd been most afraid to meet. Lewis found Tasha sitting on the hospital roof garden at sunset, staring out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. She'd been quiet all week, ever since her lunch with his mother. He'd tried to give her space, respecting whatever process she was going through, but the uncertainty was eating at him. Margaret had been mysteriously pleased about something, humming while she worked and making cryptic comments about finally understanding what matters. Nina told me I might find you up here, he said softly, settling onto the bench beside her. It's peaceful, Tasha said without looking at him. Sometimes I come here after difficult shifts, when I need to remember that the world is bigger than whatever crisis I'm dealing with. Lewis studied her profile in the fading light. Even exhausted, even lost in thought, she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. But it wasn't her beauty that had captured him. It was the strength in the set of her shoulders, the gentleness in her hands when she touched Lyra, the way she listened like every word mattered. How was lunch with my mother? He asked carefully. Tasha finally turned to look at him, and there was something in her eyes that made his breath catch. She's not what I expected. She likes you. How do you know? Because she's been making pointed comments about how I should stop overthinking things and follow my heart for the past 3 days. Lewis smiled. Margaret William doesn't make suggestions lightly. Lewis, Tasha's voice was soft, uncertain. What are we doing? The question hung between them, loaded with weeks of careful friendship and growing feelings neither of them had been brave enough to name. I don't know, Lewis admitted. I know that I think about you every morning when I wake up and every night before I sleep. I know that Lyra's laugh is the best sound I've ever heard. I know that sitting in your tiny apartment eating grilled cheese felt more like home than anywhere I've ever lived. Tasha was quiet for so long that Lewis began to worry he'd said too much, pushed too hard. I'm scared, she whispered finally. Of what? of this feeling too good to be real, of waking up one day and discovering that you've remembered who you are and decided that a single mother who works 2 jobs isn't worth the complications. Her voice broke slightly. Of Lyra getting attached to you and then losing another person she loves. Lewis turned on the bench, taking her hands in his. They were working hands, calloused from double shifts and careful with money, beautiful in their capability and strength. "Tasha, look at me." She met his eyes, and he could see the fear there but also hope fighting to survive. "I've spent my entire life being who other people expected me to be. The dutiful son, the responsible heir, the eligible bachelor who dated appropriate women and made appropriate choices. And I was miserable, empty, going through the motions of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else." He brought her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then I met you. And for the first time in 33 years, I wanted something for myself, not because it was expected or appropriate or profitable, but because it felt real, because you make me feel real. Lewis, I love you," he said, the words falling between them like stones dropped into still water. "I love your strength and your fierce protection of Lyra, and the way you can make a studio apartment feel like a palace just by being in it. I love that you've never asked me for anything except the chance to save your daughter. I love that you see me, not my bank account or my last name or my potential as a business merger, just me." Tasha's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand what you're asking for. I'm not elegant or polished or sophisticated. I don't know how to navigate your world. I can't be the kind of woman who looks good at charity galas or knows which fork to use at formal dinners." "I don't want that woman," Lewis said fiercely. "I want the woman who worked 16-hour days to try to save her daughter. I want the woman who makes grilled cheese like it's a gourmet meal and who taught a 5-year-old that scars are warrior marks. I want you, Tasha, exactly as you are. What about your mother, your business, your whole life? My mother likes you better than any woman I've ever brought home. The business will survive without me micromanaging every decision. And my whole life." Lewis paused, searching for words that could convey the magnitude of what he felt. "My whole life has been waiting for you to walk into it." Tasha pulled her hands free and stood, walking to the edge of the roof garden where the city spread out below them, like a constellation of possibilities. "Lyra asked me yesterday if you were going to be her new daddy," she said without turning around. Lewis felt his heart stop. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that was a grown-up question that required a grown-up conversation." Tasha turned back to him, and there was something different in her expression. Resolution, maybe, or surrender. "She said she hoped you would be, because you make me smile the way I used to before I got scared all the time." "And what do you hope?" Lewis asked, standing and moving toward her. "I hope," Tasha said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "that I'm brave enough to believe that sometimes good things happen to people who work hard and love fiercely and never give up." "Are you?" She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a gentleness that made him close his eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I love your kindness and your loneliness and the way you looked at Lyra like she was the most important person in the world. I love that you saw me fighting for my daughter and decided to fight with me instead of just watching from the sidelines." Lewis captured her hand against his cheek, turning to press a kiss into her palm. "I love that you make me want to be better than I am," Tasha continued. "And I love that when I'm with you I remember who I was before life tried to break me down." "So what do we do now?" Lewis asked. Tasha smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise after the longest night of his life. "Now," she said, standing on her toes to press her lips to his in a kiss that tasted like promises and hope and the beginning of everything, "we figure out how to build a life together." And as they kissed on that hospital rooftop, with the city sparkling below them and the future stretching out like an unwritten story, both of them knew they were about to discover what love could build when it was real and strong and brave enough to believe in forever. 6 months later, Tasha stood in the garden of the Willian estate, watching Lyra chase butterflies in a dress that made her look like the flying princess she'd always dreamed of being. The estate itself was overwhelming. Sprawling grounds, meticulously maintained gardens, and a house that could have accommodated 50 families. But Margaret had transformed the back garden into something magical for today. Fairy lights strung between ancient oak trees, white roses climbing wooden arbors, and chairs arranged in intimate clusters for the small gathering of people who truly mattered. "You look nervous," Nina said, appearing beside her with a knowing smile. "Second thoughts?" "No second thoughts," Tasha said, smoothing the simple white dress she'd chosen for her wedding day. Just, is this really my life now? Honey, you've been living at that house for 3 months. Lewis proposed to you on a Tuesday night while you were helping Lyra with her homework. Margaret knitted you a sweater for Christmas. This became your life the moment you said yes to dinner with a stranger in a hospital cafeteria. Tasha laughed, feeling some of the nervous energy settle. Nina was right. The past 6 months had been a gradual shift rather than a sudden transformation. Lewis had courted not just her but Lyra too, reading bedtime stories, attending princess tea parties, learning to braid hair with YouTube tutorials that made them all laugh until their sides hurt. 5 minutes, dear, Margaret said, approaching with the calm efficiency of someone who had organized countless events. But there was warmth in her eyes that Tasha had come to treasure. Lewis is pacing like a caged animal, and the minister is starting to look concerned. How does he look? Tasha asked. Like a man who's about to marry the love of his life, Margaret said simply. Terrified and ecstatic in equal measure, Mrs. Patterson appeared, leading Lyra by the hand. Lyra wore a pale pink dress with layers of tulle that rustled when she walked, and in her hair was a small tiara that Lewis had given her the night before, because every flying princess needs a crown for special occasions. Mama, you look like a real bride, Lyra announced, spinning to make her dress flare out around her. And you look like a real princess, Tasha said, kneeling to adjust Lyra's tiara. Mr. Lewis said after today, he gets to be my daddy for real. Is that true? Tasha's throat tightened with emotion. Yes, baby girl. He's going to adopt you, and we're going to be a real family. Good, Lyra said with 5-year-old satisfaction. I already picked out his Father's Day present. The ceremony was small and perfect. Dr. Harrison was there, having become an unexpected friend during Lyra's recovery. Camden had brought his wife and twin daughters, who had immediately bonded with Lyra over their shared love of princess movies. A few close colleagues from the hospital, Mrs. Patterson in her best dress, and Margaret presiding over everything with the quiet joy of a woman watching her son finally find happiness. But when the music started, and Tasha walked down the makeshift aisle between the garden chairs, there was only Lewis. He stood under an arbor heavy with white roses, wearing a simple gray suit that made his eyes look like storm clouds before rain. When he saw her approaching, his expression shifted through a dozen emotions: love, gratitude, wonder, and something that looked like relief, as if he'd been holding his breath for months and could finally exhale. Lyra walked ahead of her, scattering rose petals with the serious concentration of someone performing a very important job. When she reached Lewis, she looked up at him with complete trust. "Are you ready to be my daddy?" she whispered, loud enough for the entire gathering to hear. "I've been ready my whole life," Lewis whispered back, and Tasha saw him wipe away a tear. The vows they'd written were simple, honest, real. "Tasha," Lewis said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "you were the chaos most beautiful thing that entered my life. But you weren't chaos at all. You were clarity. You showed me what it meant to fight for something that matters, to love without reservation, to find joy in the smallest moments. You and Lyra taught me that home isn't a place. It's the people who see you at your worst and choose to love you anyway. Now I want to be your Calmaria, your peace, your safe harbor, your partner in every adventure that comes next." Tasha's voice shook as she spoke her own vows. "Lewis, you saw me at my lowest point and treated me like I was worthy of kindness. You met my daughter and loved her before you even knew my name. You gave us not just financial security, but emotional safety, the knowledge that we're not alone in the world anymore. You chose us when you could have chosen anyone, and I choose you. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lewis cupped Tasha's face in his hands with a gentleness that made her heart flutter the same way it had that first day in the cafeteria. "I love you, Mrs. Willian," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too, Mr. Willian," she whispered back. Their kiss was soft, sweet, and full of promises for the future, but it was interrupted by Lyra tugging on Lewis's jacket. "Don't forget about me," she announced, making the entire gathering laugh. Lewis swept her up in his arms, and suddenly Tasha was being embraced by both of them, her husband and her daughter, the two people who had taught her that families could be chosen as well as born. As the sun set over their small wedding celebration, Tasha found herself standing with Margaret, watching Lewis teach Lyra and Camden's daughters how to waltz on the garden grass. "Any regrets?" Margaret asked. "It's only that it took us so long to find each other," Tasha said. "Some things are worth waiting for," Margaret said quietly. Lewis waited 33 years to find someone who loved him for who he was, instead of what he could provide. You waited 27 years to find someone who would fight beside you, instead of trying to rescue you. That kind of love, it's worth the wait. Thank you, Tasha said, for accepting me, for supporting us, for raising a son who knows how to love with his whole heart. Thank you, Margaret replied, for giving me the daughter-in-law I always hoped for, and the granddaughter I never knew I needed. As the evening stretched into night, as the last guests said their goodbyes and Lyra fell asleep in Lewis's arms, while they danced to music that existed only in their hearts, Tasha realized that this wasn't an ending at all. It was the beginning of everything she'd never dared to dream. And sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin not with fairy tale perfection, but with two broken people deciding they're stronger together than they ever were apart. 5 years later, the morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of the Willian home, casting golden rectangles across the breakfast table where 3 place settings waited, 2 coffee cups and 1 glass of orange juice with a bendy straw. Tasha stood at the counter, making pancakes shaped like butterflies while listening to the familiar sounds of her family beginning their day. Upstairs, Lewis was patiently negotiating with 10-year-old Lyra about whether her flying princess training outfit was appropriate for a parent-teacher conference. But Dad, Mrs. Chen needs to see that I take my princess duties seriously. Lyra's voice carried down the stairs, filled with the earnest logic that only 4th graders possessed. Princess duties can be performed in regular clothes too, Lewis replied, his voice warm with the kind of amused patience he'd perfected over the past 5 years. Remember what we talked about? There's a time and place for everything. Fine, but I'm wearing my star bracelet. Deal. Tasha smiled, flipping a particularly ambitious butterfly pancake. The star bracelet, Margaret's gift from that first lunch, had become Lyra's talisman, worn to every important occasion. Today marked a milestone worth celebrating, Lyra's first parent-teacher conference since her heart surgery, and her grades were excellent. More than that, her daughter was thriving in ways Tasha had barely dared to hope for 5 years ago. The front door opened, and Margaret's voice called out, "I hope someone saved room for my famous cinnamon rolls." "Grandma!" Lyra's feet thundered down the stairs, followed by Lewis's deeper footsteps. Margaret had embraced her grandmother role with the same intensity she'd once brought to building a medical empire. She taught Lyra to bake, told her stories about her father's childhood, and spoiled her just enough to be fun, without undermining Tasha's authority. The relationship between them was one of the unexpected gifts of this new life. "How's my flying princess this morning?" Margaret asked, accepting Lyra's enthusiastic hug. "Ready for my conference. Dad says Mrs. Chen is going to tell you and Mama how smart I am." "We already know how smart you are," Lewis said, appearing in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Tasha over Lyra's head, and even after 5 years of marriage, the way he smiled at her in the morning still made her heart skip. He'd changed too over these years. The hollow quality that had haunted his eyes was gone, replaced by the contentment of a man who'd found his purpose. He'd taken on more hands-on roles at the medical center, focusing on programs that provided care for families who couldn't afford it. Lyra's gift, the foundation they'd started together, had already helped dozens of children receive life-saving surgeries. "Coffee?" Tasha asked, reaching for his favorite mug, a ceramic one Lyra had painted for him at a pottery studio, decorated with slightly lopsided hearts and the words, "Best Dad Ever," in purple glitter paint. "Please." Lewis kissed her cheek as he accepted the mug, a gesture so natural and routine that it felt like breathing. "How are you feeling about today?" Tasha knew he wasn't just asking about the parent-teacher conference. Today was also the 5th anniversary of Lyra's surgery, a date they'd come to celebrate as their family's second beginning. "Grateful," she said simply. And she was. Grateful for Lyra's healthy heart and bright mind. Grateful for Lewis's steady love and Margaret's unexpected friendship. Grateful for the house that had become a home, filled with artwork on the refrigerator and toys in corners and the comfortable chaos of a family that had chosen each other. "Mama, can we tell Mrs. Chen about the scholarship?" Lyra asked around a mouthful of butterfly pancake. The scholarship was Lewis's latest project, a program that would pay for nursing school for single mothers, like Tasha had been. She was going to be its first recipient, starting classes in the fall. At 32, she was finally going to pursue the dream she'd put aside, but this time with a support system that made anything feel possible. "If it comes up naturally," Tasha said, "today is about showing Mrs. Chen how hard you've been working." "I have been working hard," Lyra said with satisfaction. Did you know that butterfly migration patterns are influenced by wind currents and temperature changes, and that monarch butterflies use the sun as a compass? Lewis and Tasha exchanged glances. Their daughter's curiosity about the world seemed boundless now that she had the energy to explore it. Science, art, dance lessons, swimming. Lyra approached everything with the enthusiasm of someone making up for lost time. An hour later, they sat in tiny plastic chairs in Mrs. Chen's classroom while their daughter's teacher praised her academic progress, her kindness to classmates, and her creative thinking. Lyra wrote the most beautiful essay about courage, Mrs. Chen said, pulling out a handwritten paper. Would you like me to read a portion? At their nod, she began. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing the right thing anyway. My mama showed me courage when she worked 2 jobs to try to save my life. My dad showed me courage when he decided to love us, even though we weren't his family yet. And I show courage every day by using my strong heart to help other people feel brave too. Tasha felt Lewis reach for her hand under the desk, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of shared emotion. She wants to be a doctor when she grows up, Mrs. Chen continued, specifically a pediatric cardiologist. She says she wants to help other kids' hearts be strong enough for flying. After the conference, they celebrated with ice cream at the park where Lewis had proposed. Not in some grand gesture, but on a Tuesday evening while Lyra played on the swings, asking if Tasha would marry him with the same earnest simplicity with which their daughter approached the world. Do you ever miss it? Lewis asked as they watched Lyra navigate the monkey bars with the careful determination of someone who remembered when physical activity was limited. Miss what? The life you had before. The independence, the simplicity. Tasha considered the question seriously. She'd loved the woman she'd been. Fierce, self-reliant, protective. But that woman had been shaped by necessity, by the need to be everything to everyone, because she was all Lyra had. I don't miss being afraid all the time, she said finally. I don't miss choosing between groceries and medicine, or working double shifts and still not having enough. I don't miss feeling like Lyra and I were facing the world alone. But I'm glad I was that woman first, because she taught me that I was strong enough to survive anything, and now I get to be strong enough to thrive. Lewis lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her wedding ring. I love both versions of you, the warrior who fought to save her daughter and the woman who trusts me to fight beside her now. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Lyra ran over to them with grass stains on her knees and joy lighting her face. Dad, will you push me on the swings? I want to see if I can fly high enough to touch the clouds. Always, Lewis said, and Tasha heard in that single word a promise that extended far beyond swing sets and childhood games. As she watched her husband push their daughter toward the sky, as she listened to Lyra's laughter ring out across the park, Tasha felt the deep peace that came from knowing that love, real love, wasn't about fairy tale perfection. It was about 2 broken people deciding they were stronger together. It was about a little girl who dreamed of flying, and the man who helped her believe it was possible. It was about building something beautiful from the fragments of what came before. 5 years ago, she'd been a single mother facing the impossible. Today, she was a wife, a mother, a student, and a woman who'd learned that the best love stories weren't about being rescued. They were about finding someone brave enough to build a life together. One ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. She still returned to that same hospital cafeteria sometimes when she visited colleagues or brought Lyra for checkups. She'd sit at the corner table where Lewis had first approached her, remembering the woman she'd been. Desperate, exhausted, fighting for her daughter's life with nothing but determination and love. That woman would be amazed by this life. But more than that, she'd be proud. Proud that her courage had led to this moment, this family, this quiet happiness that felt more magical than any fairy tale. Because sometimes, the most beautiful love stories began with a mother's desperate love and ended with a family's gentle joy. And sometimes, the person you became was exactly who you were always meant to be. You just needed the right people beside you to help you remember how to fly. What does love mean to you? Have you ever found strength in the most unexpected places? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your own stories of courage and connection. Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.